United States in places like prison. People are being impacted. So thank you for that. So my conversation with Yoshi, just had this conversation with him. It's terrific. And he is such a great addition to the show, and I want you to hear more of what he has to say. He's got some great stories he's got an incredible story about how he got cast in this show and what God was doing and who God sent him. Potential spam. So this is what I'm getting from my phone. Pretty bizarre encounter with someone who kind of started steering him towards God right around the time that we were reaching out for him to potentially be in the show. So quite an amazing story, an amazing guy. Let's hear from Yoshi right now. All right, Yoshi, welcome. This is like your kind of a formal welcome into the Chosen family. Your character's been introduced. I've talked about you a bunch on live streams. You've kind of had your own interactions with fans, but this is the first time we've had you actually on a live stream with the opportunity to talk to the viewer. Your arrival in The Chosen was really cool in two ways. Number one, your arrival in an episode was like you got kind of this Wild West music accompanying it. It was clear that your character was cool. Like immediately you're kind of jousting with Simon, who's our hero of the story. So that was cool. And then I think just your arrival into the Chosen world was pretty cool because instantly fans were in the chat saying like, I love this guy's great. Like it's been kind of I think one of the better arrivals that you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, it was all in the writing, really. I lucked out and I got to play a character that is as cool as Philip is. And, I got some of my first lines in the show where, I don't know if it was you, Tyler, or Ryan, who has the credit for writing the Fat and Goose line and hope to have a wife someday line, but I can think of worse ways to enter the fraternity than those three lines right there. So yeah, I'm very blessed to have that very cool intro.
Yeah, and so what about the whole, like the fan base? I always tell actors who are joining, I'm like, you're going to get like 98% of it is going to be awesome, 2% of it's going to be a little crazy, but the Chosen fans are extremely like welcoming and loyal and passionate and supportive and encouraging and all of that stuff. Have you experienced that? Has it been kind of cool or surreal? What are your thoughts on just kind of experiencing the reaction from the fans?
The response has been absolutely overwhelming, and the Chosen fans have been so kind and filling my DMs, and it's hard to keep up with. So I have to say to everyone out there, I'm not reading most of them because it's just so much. Yeah. But I really appreciate it, and I've definitely read a few here and there. And I'm just so happy to be along on this ride with everybody, and thank you to the people I have spoken to and the people I haven't. Thank you to you as well.
So when we were casting for season 2 and looking for Philip and Nathaniel and some of these other roles, I've told this story before, but you were cast as Philip in our minds, probably 20 seconds into your audition. There was just something that you just exuded that fit what we were looking for. And my wife, Amanda, who is the co-casting mind of the project, along with our casting directors and myself, her instincts are impeccable, and she was immediately all over the Yoshi train as Philip. And so I remember when you and I started talking, you were telling me that you were having your own kind of personal experience with the show spiritually, a connection to the character. You don't have to obviously share, personal details, but can you talk a little bit about the experience of getting cast and how I feel like I remember correctly, you were starting to have a relationship with the show or some impact from it and with a family member even before you got cast. Can you kind of talk us through that a little bit?
So it's pretty wild how everything just sort of synced up at the time that it did. But my aunt, Isabel, apparently tried to get me involved in the show at season 1. She had reached out to me and asked me to audition for season 1. And at the time, my headspace just wasn't oriented around the idea that a Christian show could be something worth pursuing. And my agent, I hadn't heard about the show at the time. And so I think I just sort of, wrote it off to my crazy aunt trying to get me involved in some, low budget thing that maybe she had a friend who was involved with. I didn't really pay it any mind. But when season 2 came around, my agent found the audition and got me on it. And it was interesting timing, because when season 1 was going on, I hadn't really, my headspace wasn't at all oriented around the Bible. I had never read it. I grew up Catholic, but never connected with the material as a child, and quickly kind of fell out of it. But it just so happened that around the time that the audition came through for season 2, I had been studying the Bible pretty rigorously. I had found the Jordan Peterson lectures on Genesis, and that kind of kickstarted my interest, because he sort of took a psychological approach to the material. Right. And I started to understand the parables of the Bible very briefly. But by the time the audition came around, I was so engrossed in it, and I had some pretty wild experiences that were sort of telling me that this was all meant to be. I was on a hike one time in Los Angeles, a hike called the Wisdom Tree, and I was in a pretty bad place at the time. I was very confused. I was going through a breakup and was looking for answers. And I was on this hike, and I was reading a book. I can't remember what book I was reading, but I was just sitting there on my own, just minding my own business. And I started to hear some commotion to my left. And it was lots of girls' voices, kind of like in excitement and screaming. And then the voices sort of went away, and then I was kind of on my own again. And out of nowhere, I heard a voice go, "Hey, what are you reading?" And I look over to my left, and it was Justin Bieber standing there and looking at me and inquiring about the book I was reading. So I said, I started answering him. I was telling him what I was reading. We started having a dialogue kind of from far away, and I was like, "Yeah, I can't really hear you. Why don't you come join me?" So the short version of the story is that Justin Bieber came and sat with me, and he was also in a dark place at the time too, so we kind of started connecting on that. And he ended up stopping me like mid-sentence at some point and just saying, like, "Hey man, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I feel in my heart of hearts right now that I'm supposed to introduce you to church." And the short version of the story is that Justin Bieber brought me to his church home with Pastor Judah, and just sort of introduced me to what they were doing over there. And that was my introduction to the New Testament, was basically every Wednesday going over there and hearing Pastor Judah just talk about the stories, the parables of the New Testament. So I had Jordan Peterson in one year teaching me the Old Testament, and then I had Church Home teaching me the New Testament. And then I started reading the stories on my own, and then that's when the audition came. So everything was just very synced up when the opportunity came, and then my head was already in it. And I very much connected to the material of Nathaniel initially, who I initially auditioned for. But obviously, as we know now, Philip was the one I was meant to play. So yeah. It's been a wild ride, and I'm extremely blessed to be telling this story with you guys.
Yeah. What about the character of Philip? Now that you're in it, and Philip has become, as I mentioned, a fan favorite. We have these series of what we call Philip quips. I mean, in your first episode, there were probably about 5 like just truth bombs that your character got to drop. Jonathan and I were just in Italy. I think you might have known that, but we visited the remains, supposedly the remains of Philip and little James are in this church in Italy. They were transported from some other country. I'm blanking on it now, but so we had a chance to just see the remains. And I don't personally have any kind of connection to graves or to remains, because I believe Philip is alive, but it was a very meaningful moment for us because we thought of you and Jordan, and we thought about the fact that, and I remember thinking, like, Yoshi needs to be here at some point. because this was a real person. Like, this was a man who had a huge impact on the world forever, and in his missionary journeys and all of that. So it's kind of a two-part question: is your connection to the character that we've written, which some of which is from the Bible, a lot of which is not, but also just the actual human being of Philip. Have you had those moments of connection and of research and making this, bringing to life someone that you know was actually alive?
As far as the research went into, preparing for the role, there's not too much historical reference to look at when it comes to the disciples, most of them at least. But I was lucky enough to have David Amito's John the Baptist storyline to refer to, considering that Philip came from that brotherhood, that order. So that's kind of what I relied on in the preparation for the role. Was I looked at John the Baptist's brotherhood. As far as I can tell, there's three major mystic sects in the Jewish tradition. There's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, I believe you pronounce it,
yep.
And then there was the Essenes, which was a group that's not really talked about as much, but a lot of scholars put John the Baptist with the Essenes, and so I sort of focused on the Essenes, and I looked at their tradition, and I looked at what that brotherhood was like, and they were a sort of a practical implementation of John 3:6, which you guys cover with that beautiful scene between Jesus and Nicodemus, focusing on the distinction between the flesh and the spirit. And so they sort of focused on the initiation of the brothers into the purification of the spirit, sort of fleshing out the temptations and the passions. They would cultivate their own fields. They would, manufacture their own clothing. They would rise before the sun. They wouldn't speak to each other except mostly just prayers of gratitude. They would take cold plunges every morning, and study nature. And so I sort of looked at that process that, by all likelihood, if Philip is one of John's students, he was undergoing throughout many, many years of his life. And I kind of created a backstory for Philip, that he came from a troubled past and then had to go through these initiations for many years before he was prepared to go out and follow Jesus. So by the time I get to Jesus, unlike maybe lots of his other followers, I've sort of, by that time I've subjected my psyche to a whole lot of pain,
right.
So that I can be prepared. So unlike the other disciples, throughout season 2, lots of the ideas that you guys are exploring was, complaining, like all the disciples complaining and getting used to this new lifestyle of having to follow Jesus, and just how tumultuous that is to be on the road with him. I kind of had that contrast to work with, where I get to look around and say, oh, these guys just haven't been through it yet, these guys and gals. But I kind of have. So that gave me a lot to work with, as far as how Philip is just a little more prepared than the others.
You and I certainly wouldn't call this conflict, but you and I oftentimes had back and forth about your approach to I would call it the language of the show. Especially early on, I was often saying to you, I want to see more of Yoshi. I want to see...
bring out the Yoshi.
Yeah, I cast you for a reason. And I feel like you kind of had this... I don't know if formal is the right word, but you were treating it with a little bit more formality and maybe some reverence. And I was like, I want to see your personality and the humanity of this character. Talk about that real quick, just about some of the back and forth you and I had on the set the first couple of days we were working.
All the things everything that the fans love about my performance, Dallas was completely instrumental in bringing me to those places. No, you actually were, because I went into the whole process of the show with a lot of ideas. As I was a bit confused as to who Philip was initially. You really helped me flesh that out by sort of dropping the ideas of maybe I had of Philip being like a teacher, or something like this, and you helped me realize that, like you said, like you and Amanda brought me on because of just who I am. That journey itself for me was such a growing experience, because I think I grew and learned as an actor just playing Philip, because you guys helped me realize that when I just got to show up and drop all my preconceived notions and just let the spirit move through me and just do whatever it is that is going to happen, and not to think so much and just to be. And yeah, that was an ongoing theme over and over again. You would say, yeah, but let's just bring Yoshi out, and then that would always help me just kind of drop my guard and just be present with the fellow actors and listen and react genuinely.
Yeah, that's I think you would agree that one of the things that makes that easy is the cast. I mean, the other cast members are all just great scene partners, and so I know it makes it easier. We'll wrap up here in just a minute, but I'd love to hear your favorite scene to do from season 2. Like, what was your favorite scene to be in, just the process of it? And then I'd love to hear just your favorite scene to watch of season 2. I know the fans love actually hearing some of the cast members' favorite moments from the season, so I'd love to hear, first of all, again, what your favorite scene to do was, and then when you watched season 2, what was something that really impacted you?
Hands down, my favorite scene was the one shot. That was the most fun I've ever had as a performer, as an actor. I learned that day that I really like when the pressure is high, when the pressure is on, when everybody has to come together as a collective machine, a well-oiled machine, and everybody has to really have their A game going. I like when the pressure's high like that. I think it brings the best out of everybody, and I like that we had to depend on each other and just plow through any sort of mistakes that might have been happening during the process.
Do you remember? Some people have seen the behind-the-scenes video of that, but I had you were the one that when I started talking to, I broke down after we finally got it, because it was so hard to get that shot. It took us so many times, and there was so much pressure, because, again, we didn't have a good take until our last possible take. And
I know.
There were two reasons why. There were two reasons
chosen fashion for that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. But there were two reasons why I just started crying when I talked to you. Was one, there was a moment halfway through that shot where, if people watch closely, I don't want to be telling tales out of school, but where you were halfway through a line talking about, like, Big James says, yeah, I bumped into this guy and he reopened my wound, and you start talking about, like, that's the same guy that I talked, and there's a moment when I think the bike goes into the ditch and you lose the line for a second, and there's this, and you did such a great job of, like, staying in it, because I saw it, because I know the scene so well, and I know you, and I know the line, so I know that you were like, where'd the line go? And I'm like, oh, please, and you just stayed in it, and you recovered it. It was great. No one would ever know the difference. And so I was so
I don't know about that.
Well, I was so thankful that you stayed present, because it could have been so easy to lose it. So I was thankful to you personally just for that moment. But then also, there were several moments in that scene where Philip is kind of the transition point.
Yeah, so I just love scenarios like that where everybody really has to come together and just do their best. And your other question
favorite scene or episode or whatever to watch when you got to see it, season 2.
Without giving it too much thought, the one that's coming to mind is actually from the same episode. Later on in the episode, I just love when all the disciples are sitting around the campfire and just woe is me, focusing on themselves and just kind of battling it out. I think some of the best acting from the season happened in that scene, between Shahar, Noah, Liz, and
Paris,
and Paris, and the brothers, all of them, and Mother Mary. Everyone, I think, is at their A game in that, and I think the show's at its best when, like, everyone's just kind of, like, sitting and facing each other and, like, going at it with each other. And I think that they did some of their best work of the series in that scene. And then, of course, to cap it off, when Jonathan walks in, and everybody sort of gets to see the contrast of where they're at compared to where he's at, what his focus is on. He doesn't try to correct them. He just walks past them and shows an example of what it is that they're supposed to be focusing on. And he's just like, the little wave that Jonathan gives And like the little mannerisms in his face right there are so powerful. They gave me the chills. I could tear it up. And then Mother Mary washing his feet. And then everybody just has to sit in that and just like roast in that, like, perfection of Jesus. And they have to kind of, bow their heads and really say, okay, I need to recollect myself and really find what I'm supposed to be focusing on, because somewhere along the way I've lost that. And I think that's a really turning moment for lots of disciples right there, where they sort of are able to gather themselves and realize that they have to come together and be together and love one another.
Yeah. Well, Yoshi, thank you so much for being here with us, and you fit into the cast so seamlessly, and it's been a pleasure just for me personally as I've gotten to know you better. I just love working with you, and I can't wait to do it for another 5 seasons, and who knows, maybe there's going to be more after that. But in the meantime, thank you for your gift to the show, to the people watching, and to me. So it means a lot how much passion and effort you put into it. So I love you, brother.
I appreciate that, and I ditto all that, and I'm honored to be a part of the orchestra that you're conducting, and to be on this journey with all the fans as well. I'm just blown away by this experience, and I thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Great. All right. I will see you soon. Isn't he cool? Such a great addition to the show.